Maria Santos had always been invisible. At 23, she moved through the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado like a ghost, her cleaning cart while squeaking softly against the polished floors of corridors where America's most elite warriors trained. Every morning at 5:30, she arrived at the base, her uniform pressed in, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, ready to clean spaces that most civilians would never see. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, Maria had grown up in National City, just across the bay from the exclusive Coronado Peninsula. Her father worked construction, her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. They had taught her that honest work was dignified work, no matter what others might think. When the cleaning company she worked for landed the contract for the SEAL training facilities, Maria felt proud to contribute to something bigger than herself, even if her role seemed small. The SEAL training areas were unlike anywhere else on base. The smell of salt water mixed with sweat and determination hung in the air. Equipment rooms lined with weapons, gear, and training materials that spoke of missions she could only imagine. The men who trained here moved with a purpose that Maria recognized from her own family's work ethic, but amplified by something she couldn't quite name. It was dedication beyond anything she had ever witnessed. Maria's supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, was a strict woman in her 50s who had worked military contracts for over 20 years. She made it clear from day one that the cleaning staff were to be efficient, invisible, and absolutely professional at all times. No talking to personnel unless spoken to first, no touching equipment unless specifically assigned to clean it, and certainly no lingering in areas where classified activities might be taking place. The training schedule was demanding and unpredictable. Some days Maria would arrive to find the facilities empty, with only the aftermath of intense physical training sessions to clean up. Other days, she would work around groups of SEAL candidates pushing themselves to their absolute limits. She learned to time her work carefully, staying out of the way while ensuring everything was spotless for the next group of warriors in training. During her first month on the job, Maria developed a routine. She would start with the administrative areas, then move to the equipment rooms, and finish with the training spaces themselves. The work was physically demanding, but she took pride in maintaining these facilities where America's finest prepared for missions that could determine the fate of hostages, the success of critical operations, or the safety of fellow service members. The SEAL instructors were a different breed entirely. These were men who had completed multiple deployments, seen combat, and returned to pass on their knowledge to the next generation. They moved with quiet confidence, spoke in measured tones, and commanded respect without ever having to demand it. Maria observed them from a distance, noting how they pushed the candidates not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. One instructor in particular caught her attention, though she was careful never to stare. He was older than the others, probably in his 40s, with graying temples and scars that told stories she would never know. The candidates called him Admiral Reeves, and even the other instructors seemed to defer to him. He had a way of appearing exactly where he was needed, whether to correct a technique, offer encouragement, or make a split-second decision that could affect someone's career. Maria had been cleaning the main training area on a Tuesday morning when she first heard him speak. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority as he addressed a group of struggling candidates. He wasn't yelling like some instructors did, but every word seemed to carry the weight of experience and wisdom earned through years of service. She found herself working more slowly than usual, unconsciously listening to his guidance about mental toughness and the importance of never giving up on your teammates. The cleaning work gave Maria a unique perspective on the SEAL training process. She saw the candidates at their lowest moments, exhausted and questioning their abilities. She cleaned up after training sessions that pushed human beings to their breaking points. She witnessed the gradual transformation of ordinary men into warriors capable of extraordinary things. It was inspiring and humbling at the same time. Her own life felt small in comparison to the magnitude of what happened in these facilities every day. She lived in a small apartment she shared with her younger sister, Rosa, who was studying nursing at the local community college. Their parents worked long hours to support both daughters' futures, and Maria's job at the base was a crucial part of keeping the family financially stable. She had dreams of her own, perhaps finishing her education someday, but those seemed distant compared to the immediate needs of her family. The candidates came and went in cycles, some successfully completing their training and moving on to active duty, others facing the difficult reality that they weren't cut out for this level of service. Maria saw both outcomes regularly, and it gave her a deep appreciation for the sacrifice and commitment required to serve at this level. She began to understand that her role, small as it might seem, was part of supporting something much larger than herself. As weeks passed, Maria became more comfortable with her environment. She learned the rhythms of the training schedule, knew which areas would need extra attention after particularly intense sessions, and developed an efficiency that impressed even Mrs. Patterson. She began to take pride not just in her work, but in being part of the machine that produced America's most elite warriors. The base itself became familiar territory. She knew every hallway, every storage room, every training area. She could navigate the complex with confidence, moving her equipment from location to location without disrupting the important work happening around her. The security guards recognized her, the other cleaning staff looked to her for guidance on difficult areas, and she began to feel like she truly belonged in this environment. But Maria remained largely invisible to the SEALs themselves. They were focused on their training, their missions, their transformation from ordinary service members to extraordinary operators. She was part of the background, ensuring their environment was clean and ready, but not someone they needed to notice or interact with. This suited her fine. She wasn't seeking attention or recognition, just the satisfaction of doing important work well. One evening, as she was finishing up in the equipment room, she overheard a conversation between two instructors about an upcoming training exercise. They were discussing the importance of adaptability, of being ready for situations that couldn't be planned for or predicted. One of them mentioned that the best operators were those who could assess a situation quickly and make decisions based on capability rather than assumptions. These words stayed with Maria as she finished her shift and headed home. She thought about adaptability in her own life, about the decisions she made every day to support her family and work toward a better future. She realized that in her own way, she was already practicing many of the qualities she observed in the SEALs, just in a very different context. The next morning brought an unusual energy to the base. There was more activity than normal, with personnel moving equipment and preparing for what appeared to be a major training exercise. Maria adjusted her schedule to stay out of the way, focusing on areas that wouldn't interfere with the preparations. She could sense the anticipation in the air, the focused intensity that preceded important events. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the men and women who would soon be participating in whatever exercise was being planned. They had trained for months or years to reach this point, had pushed themselves beyond normal human limitations, had committed their lives to serving something greater than themselves. She felt honored to play even a small role in supporting their preparation. The equipment room was busier than usual that morning. SEALs and instructors moved in and out, checking weapons, reviewing gear, and conducting final preparations. Maria worked carefully around them, maintaining her professional invisibility while ensuring everything was clean and organized. She noticed Admiral Reeves among them, his calm presence anchoring the controlled chaos of preparation. Something felt different about this day, though Maria couldn't put her finger on exactly what it was. There was an underlying tension, a sense that this wasn't just another routine training exercise. The conversations she overheard were more serious, the preparations more thorough. Whatever was about to happen, it was important enough to command the full attention of some of the most experienced operators on the base. As the morning progressed, Maria found herself working in areas she normally wouldn't access during active training periods. The exercise seemed to require use of facilities throughout the complex, and her supervisor had assigned her to ensure everything was ready regardless of the disruption to normal routines. She moved through the base with her usual efficiency, but with a heightened awareness of the significance of what was unfolding around her. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual as Maria prepared to finish her morning assignments. She understood that her work contributed to the readiness of men and women who might soon face life or death situations in service to their country. Every surface she cleaned, every piece of equipment she organized, every detail she attended to could play a small part in ensuring these warriors were prepared for whatever challenges awaited them. The alarm that shattered the morning routine wasn't part of any training exercise Maria had ever witnessed. It came at 9:47, sharp and urgent, cutting through the normal sounds of preparation like a knife. She was in the main equipment room when it happened, organizing cleaning supplies while SEALs conducted final gear checks around her. The sound made everyone freeze for a split second before training and instinct took over. Admiral Reeves appeared in the doorway almost instantly, his expression transformed from calm preparation to focused command. Maria had never seen such a rapid shift in demeanor, and she understood immediately that something real was happening. This wasn't a drill or an exercise. The conversations around her switched from routine preparation to rapid, clipped communications that carried the weight of genuine emergency. Within minutes, the entire atmosphere of the base changed. Personnel who had been moving with the purposeful calm of training preparation now moved with the sharp efficiency of actual crisis response. Radio chatter filled the air with coded communications that Maria couldn't understand but recognized as urgent. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way while continuing to process what was unfolding around her. The emergency involved a situation off the coast, something requiring immediate deployment of SEAL assets. Maria caught fragments of conversation about a civilian vessel in distress, potential hostile involvement, and time-critical rescue requirements. The exact details were beyond her security clearance and understanding, but the urgency was unmistakable. Lives were at stake, and the men around her were preparing to risk their own lives to save others. Admiral Reeves moved through the equipment room like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony. He issued orders with calm precision, coordinated resources with other commanders, and made rapid decisions that would determine the success or failure of whatever operation was being launched. Maria watched him transform from instructor to operational commander, and she began to understand the depth of experience and capability that had earned him his position. The logistics of rapid deployment were staggering to witness. Equipment that had been organized for training was rapidly reconfigured for actual operations. Weapons were checked and double-checked, communication systems tested, transportation coordinated. Every action was purposeful, efficient, and executed with the kind of precision that only came from years of training and experience. Maria found herself in an impossible position. Her job was to stay out of the way and maintain the facilities, but the emergency had transformed the base into something entirely different. Normal protocols were suspended, and she wasn't sure what her role should be in this new reality. She continued working, keeping areas clean and organized as best she could while the controlled chaos of emergency deployment swirled around her. The human element of what was happening began to sink in as she observed the SEALs preparing for deployment. These weren't characters in a movie or figures from a story, they were real people preparing to face genuine danger to save others they had never met. She saw the focus in their eyes, the careful attention to every detail of their preparation, the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were ready for whatever awaited them. One of the younger SEALs, someone she had seen in training sessions over the past several weeks, was having equipment issues. His communication system wasn't functioning properly, and the technical personnel were working frantically to resolve the problem. Time was critical, and every minute of delay could mean the difference between success and tragedy for whoever needed rescue. Admiral Reeves noticed the delay and moved to assess the situation personally. Maria watched him evaluate the problem with the same calm focus he brought to everything else, asking precise questions and making rapid decisions about alternatives. His leadership wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was absolutely effective. Within minutes, he had coordinated a solution that kept the mission timeline on track. The preparation process revealed layers of complexity that Maria had never considered. Beyond the obvious elements like weapons and equipment, there were intelligence briefings, coordination with other military assets, communication protocols with civilian authorities, and contingency planning for multiple scenarios. The SEALs were preparing not just for one mission, but for any of several possible missions depending on what they found when they reached their destination. As the deployment preparation intensified, Maria realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. She was seeing the moment when training became reality, when preparation met actual crisis, when the capabilities developed through months and years of intensive training were applied to save real lives. The weight of that responsibility was evident in every action, every decision, every communication. The equipment room became a nexus of activity as different teams coordinated their preparations. Maria continued her work as best she could, but she was increasingly aware that her normal routine had been completely disrupted by events beyond anyone's control. She adapted as she could, focusing on maintaining areas that weren't critical to the immediate deployment while staying completely out of the way of operational activities. Admiral Reeves paused in his coordination activities to speak briefly with each team leader. Maria couldn't hear the specific words, but she could see the effect of his presence on the men preparing for deployment. There was something about his calm confidence that seemed to anchor everyone else, providing a stable foundation for the intense activity surrounding them. The timeline for deployment was compressed beyond anything Maria had observed during training exercises. What normally took hours was being accomplished in minutes, but without any apparent sacrifice in thoroughness or attention to detail. Every piece of equipment was checked, every protocol followed, every safety measure observed even under the pressure of genuine emergency. Communication with the crisis site provided periodic updates that affected deployment planning. The situation was evolving rapidly, requiring continuous adjustments to equipment, personnel assignments, and tactical approaches. Maria watched Admiral Reeves process new information and translate it into immediate changes in preparation activities, demonstrating the kind of adaptability she had heard discussed in training sessions. The personal cost of this kind of service became clear as she observed the SEALs preparing to deploy. These men were leaving families, interrupting personal lives, accepting significant personal risk to respond to a crisis involving people they didn't know. The commitment required was beyond anything in Maria's personal experience, but she was beginning to understand its importance. As deployment time approached, the intensity in the equipment room reached its peak. Final checks were conducted, last-minute adjustments made, and communications protocols established. Maria pressed herself even further into the background, recognizing that she was witnessing something far more significant than her normal work environment. The sound of helicopters approaching the base added another layer of urgency to the situation. Transportation had arrived, and the window for deployment was opening. Everything that had been prepared over the past hour would now be put to the test in real-world conditions where mistakes could cost lives. Admiral Reeves conducted a final briefing that brought all the preparation activities together into a coherent operational plan. His voice carried the same calm authority Maria had observed during training sessions, but now it was focused on an actual mission with real stakes. Every word seemed chosen carefully, every instruction precisely delivered. The weapons check that followed was unlike anything Maria had witnessed during routine training. Each weapon was examined not just for functionality, but for optimal performance under the specific conditions expected during the mission. Ammunition was counted, backup systems verified, and contingency equipment prepared for multiple scenarios. As the final minutes before deployment ticked away, Maria found herself holding her breath. She was about to witness the transition from preparation to action, from training to real-world application of everything these warriors had learned. The magnitude of that transition was overwhelming, and she felt privileged to observe it even from her position in the background. The radio crackled with final communications from the crisis site, providing last-second intelligence that would inform the SEALs' approach to their mission. Admiral Reeves processed this information rapidly, making final adjustments to deployment plans and ensuring every team member understood any changes to their assigned roles. The moment of deployment was approaching, and, with it, Maria would witness the transformation of everything she had observed over months of training into real-world action with life-or-death consequences. The moment Admiral Reeves turned toward Maria, the world seemed to slow down around them. She had been cleaning the same section of equipment rack for the third time, trying to stay busy while remaining invisible during the intense deployment preparations. When his eyes met hers across the bustling equipment room, she felt a jolt of panic. Had she done something wrong? Was she in the way of something critical? But what happened next defied every expectation Maria had developed during her months working at the base. Admiral Reeves didn't ask her to move or leave the area. Instead, he walked directly toward her with the same purposeful stride she had observed during countless training sessions. In his hands was his primary service rifle, a weapon that represented years of training, countless missions, and the absolute pinnacle of military precision. "Miss Santos," he said, and Maria was startled to realize he knew her name. In all her months of invisible work around the SEAL training areas, she had never imagined that any of the instructors or personnel knew who she was. The sound of her name and his calm, authoritative voice made her freeze completely, unsure of what protocol she should follow. Admiral Reeves extended the rifle toward her, and, for a moment Maria's mind simply couldn't process what was happening. This was a military weapon, precisely maintained and calibrated for use by one of America's most elite warriors. She was a civilian cleaning contractor with no military training, no weapons experience, and no authority to handle such equipment. Surely he didn't mean for her to take it. "I need you to hold this for exactly 3 minutes, Admiral Reeves said, his voice carrying the same calm command authority that made SEAL candidates respond instantly to his instructions. "Can you do that for me?" The question wasn't really a question in the way normal conversations worked. It was a request from a superior officer during an emergency situation, and Maria found herself nodding before her conscious mind had fully processed the request. The weight of the rifle as Admiral Reeves placed it in her hands was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical weight of metal and precision engineering, it was the weight of responsibility, of trust, of being handed something that represented the pinnacle of military capability. Her hands shook slightly as she accepted the weapon, and she was terrified of dropping it or handling it improperly. Admiral Reeves positioned her hands correctly on the rifle, his touch brief and professional but reassuring. "Safety is on," he said quietly, pointing to a small lever that meant nothing to Maria but apparently was important for her to know. "Keep it pointed toward the ground, don't touch anything else, and hand it back to me in exactly 3 minutes. Can you do that?" Maria nodded again, still not trusting her voice to work properly. Around them, the deployment preparations continued at their frantic pace, but she was suddenly the center of something she didn't understand. Other SEALs glanced in their direction, and she saw expressions ranging from surprise to curiosity to what might have been approval. No one questioned Admiral Reeves' decision, but it was clearly unusual. The reason for this extraordinary request became clear as Admiral Reeves moved to assist with a critical equipment malfunction that required his immediate attention. One of the deployment teams had discovered a problem with their primary communication system that could compromise the entire mission. The repair required specialized knowledge that Admiral Reeves possessed, and it needed both of his hands working with delicate electronic components. Maria stood frozen in place, holding a military weapon worth more than she earned in several months, while around her the most elite warriors in the American military prepared for a life-or-death mission. The surreal nature of her situation was overwhelming, but she focused on Admiral Reeves' simple instructions. 3 minutes. Keep it pointed down. Don't touch anything. Hand it back. The communication system repair was complex and delicate work. Maria watched Admiral Reeves' hands move with the same precision she had observed during weapons training, but now applied to electronic components that could determine whether the SEAL teams could coordinate effectively during their mission. Every connection he made, every adjustment he performed, could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Other SEALs worked around them, completing their own preparations while staying aware of the communication repair progress. The helicopter engines were growing louder outside, indicating that departure time was approaching rapidly. Every second mattered, and Maria found herself holding her breath as Admiral Reeves worked to resolve the equipment malfunction. The weight of the rifle seemed to increase as the seconds passed. Maria's arms began to ache from maintaining the exact position Admiral Reeves had shown her, but she didn't dare shift her grip or adjust her stance. This weapon represented trust that she had never expected to receive, and she was determined not to betray that trust through any careless action. Around the 2-minute mark, another SEAL approached them and seemed about to offer to take the rifle from Maria. Admiral Reeves shook his head slightly without looking up from his repair work, and the other SEAL moved away without comment. The message was clear: Admiral Reeves had made a deliberate choice, and it wasn't to be questioned or changed. The repair work required tools and techniques that Maria couldn't begin to understand. Admiral Reeves removed components, tested connections, and made adjustments with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing life-saving surgery. In a very real sense, that's exactly what he was doing. The communication system he was repairing could determine whether his teams could call for backup, coordinate their actions, or request emergency extraction if something went wrong. Maria began to understand that she was witnessing something extraordinary beyond just the unusual circumstance of holding a SEAL's rifle. She was seeing the depth of capability that these warriors possessed, the breadth of knowledge and skill that went far beyond weapons and physical training. Admiral Reeves was demonstrating expertise in electronics, communications, leadership, and crisis management all simultaneously. The final minute of her 3-minute assignment seemed to last forever. The helicopter noise was now overwhelming, indicating that departure was imminent. Other teams were conducting final equipment checks and moving toward the exit. The entire deployment timeline was compressed into this moment, and Maria was an unlikely part of it. Admiral Reeves completed the communication system repair with 30 seconds to spare. He tested the system quickly, confirmed that it was functioning properly, and then turned back to Maria. The relief in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. The repair had been successful, and the mission could proceed without the communication handicap that could have proved fatal. "Thank you, Miss Santos," Admiral Reeves said as he took his rifle back from her trembling hands. The weapon seemed to settle naturally into his grip, becoming an extension of himself in a way that Maria was only beginning to appreciate. "You've just helped save lives." The words were spoken quietly, but they carried a weight that Maria knew she would remember for the rest of her life. As Admiral Reeves quickly checked his weapon and rejoined his team, Maria remained standing in the same spot, trying to process what had just happened. She had been trusted with something precious by someone who had no reason to trust her. She had played a small but crucial role in preparing for a mission that would determine whether people lived or died. The magnitude of that responsibility was overwhelming. The SEALs moved toward the exit with the fluid coordination of a perfectly synchronized team. Each man carried equipment representing thousands of hours of training and millions of dollars of investment in their capabilities. But Maria now understood that the most important thing they carried was the trust and commitment to each other and to the people they had sworn to protect. Admiral Reeves paused at the equipment room exit and looked back at Maria. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed to convey respect and gratitude. Then, he was gone, leading his teams toward helicopters and a mission that would test everything they had learned and prepared for. The equipment room fell silent except for the fading sound of helicopter rotors. Maria stood alone among the remaining equipment and supplies, still processing the extraordinary few minutes she had just experienced. Her hands continued to shake slightly, and she realized that she had been holding her breath for most of the final minute. The trust that Admiral Reeves had shown her was unlike anything in her previous experience. He had assessed her quickly, determined that she could handle the responsibility, and acted on that assessment without hesitation. The decision had been based on capability rather than position, on character rather than credentials. It was a lesson in leadership that Maria would never forget. As she resumed her cleaning duties, Maria found that everything looked different. The equipment around her wasn't just military hardware, it was the tools that enabled extraordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Her work wasn't just maintenance, it was supporting a mission that extended far beyond the base perimeter to anywhere in the world where American values and American lives needed protection. The silence in the equipment room was profound after the intense activity of deployment preparation. Maria worked alone, but she no longer felt invisible or unimportant. She had been trusted with something precious, and that trust had revealed her own capabilities in ways she was still beginning to understand. The hours following the SEAL's departure passed in a strange twilight of normalcy and underlying tension. Maria continued her cleaning duties, but every sound made her look up hopefully for news of the mission. The base operated with the subdued efficiency of a medical facility during surgery, everyone maintaining their responsibilities while part of their attention remained focused on events they couldn't control. By afternoon, fragments of information began filtering back through official channels. The civilian vessel that had triggered the emergency response was a research ship that had suffered catastrophic engine failure during a storm. Worse, initial communications suggested there might have been hostile interference with their distress systems, which had delayed rescue coordination and put the crew in additional danger. Maria learned these details through conversations she overheard while cleaning administrative areas. The base personnel were careful about operational security, but the human need to understand and process what was happening couldn't be completely suppressed. She pieced together a picture of her colleagues facing not just environmental challenges, but potentially armed opposition while trying to save innocent lives. The research vessel carried a crew of 12, including 2 marine biologists, 3 graduate students, a documentary film crew, and essential ship personnel. They had been conducting routine oceanographic research when the storm hit, turning their scientific mission into a fight for survival. The combination of mechanical failure and deteriorating weather conditions had created a situation that required immediate SEAL intervention. As evening approached, the base communications center became the focal point for everyone's attention. Official updates were sparse, but Maria noticed increased activity among the senior staff. Radio operators worked extended shifts, additional personnel were called in, and the overall tension level remained high. Something significant was happening, but the details remained classified beyond her clearance level. The personal impact of the mission became real when Maria encountered the wife of one of the deployed SEALs in the base commissary. The woman was shopping for dinner with 2 small children, maintaining a cheerful demeanor while her eyes betrayed the worry that military families knew intimately. Maria recognized the careful balance between normal life and the underlying reality that someone you loved was facing danger you couldn't share or fully understand. This encounter reminded Maria that the mission she had briefly touched wasn't just about professional military operations. It was about husbands and fathers, sons and brothers who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers. The rifle she had held for 3 minutes belonged to someone who might not return home, someone whose family was maintaining faith and routine while waiting for news that might never come. The complexity of the rescue operation began to emerge through careful observation of base communications traffic. Multiple military assets were involved, including Navy ships, Coast Guard vessels, and Air Force reconnaissance aircraft. The SEALs were apparently the tip of a much larger spear, the specialized capability deployed when conventional rescue methods weren't sufficient for the conditions and challenges involved. Weather reports painted a grim picture of the rescue environment. The storm system that had initially disabled the research vessel was intensifying rather than diminishing, creating sea conditions that challenged even military rescue capabilities. Wave heights were exceeding safe limits for standard rescue operations, and visibility was nearly zero in the target area. Maria found herself working later than usual, reluctant to leave the base while the mission remained unresolved. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed her extended hours and approached her with a knowing look. "First time watching them deploy for real?" she asked gently. When Maria nodded, Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with understanding. "It never gets easier, but you learn to have faith in their training and their commitment to each other." The conversation with Mrs. Patterson revealed that the older woman had been supporting military operations for over 2 decades. She had witnessed dozens of deployments, from routine training missions to life-or-death operations like the current rescue. Her calm confidence in the SEALs' capabilities was based on years of seeing them accomplish the impossible through skill, teamwork, and unwavering dedication to their mission. As darkness fell, Maria made her final rounds through the training facilities, ensuring everything was prepared for the team's return. She paid special attention to the medical areas, understanding that combat operations sometimes resulted in wounded personnel who needed immediate care. The thought of Admiral Reeves or any of his team members requiring medical attention made her stomach tighten with worry. The equipment room where she had held Admiral Reeves' rifle felt different now. Every piece of remaining gear represented capabilities that might be needed for follow-up operations or emergency response. Maria cleaned and organized with extra care, understanding that her work might directly impact the readiness of personnel who could be called upon at any moment. Radio chatter increased significantly after 2,100 hours, indicating that something important was happening in the operational area. Maria couldn't understand the coded communications, but the intensity and frequency of transmissions suggested that the mission had reached a critical phase. She found herself pausing in her work to listen, hoping for any indication of positive developments. The base medical facility prepared for potential casualties with quiet efficiency. Additional medical personnel were called in, emergency supplies were checked and double-checked, and trauma teams positioned themselves for immediate response. The preparations were routine for such operations, but they served as a sobering reminder of the risks involved in the rescue mission. Near midnight, a change in the communication pattern suggested that something significant had occurred. The steady stream of operational traffic was replaced by longer, more detailed transmissions that seemed to carry different urgency. Maria noticed senior personnel moving toward the communications center with expressions that might have indicated either concern or relief. The first concrete news came at 0030 hours through unofficial channels. One of the communication technicians, speaking quietly to a colleague, mentioned that contact had been established with the research vessel. The crew was still alive, but their situation remained desperate. The SEALs had successfully reached the target area and were beginning rescue operations under extremely challenging conditions. Relief and anxiety battled in Maria's chest as she processed this information. The teams were alive and in contact, which was positive news, but the most dangerous part of their mission was just beginning. Extracting 12 civilians from a disabled vessel in storm conditions while potentially under hostile observation required capabilities at the absolute limit of even SEAL training and experience. The rescue operation timeline stretched into the early morning hours. Each update, when it came, painted a picture of extraordinary courage and skill being applied under the worst possible conditions. The SEALs had managed to establish communications with the research vessel, assess the crew's condition, and begin the complex process of transferring 12 people from a storm-damaged ship to military rescue assets. Technical challenges complicated every aspect of the rescue. The research vessel's position made helicopter extraction impossible due to weather conditions. Naval assets couldn't approach closely enough for direct transfer due to the storm and potential hostile activity. The SEALs were forced to implement contingency procedures that pushed their equipment and training to absolute limits. As dawn approached, Maria realized she had been awake for over 24 hours, unable to leave the base while Admiral Reeves and his teams remained in danger. Her small apartment across the base seemed irrelevant compared to the drama unfolding in the operational area. She had become emotionally invested in the mission's success in a way that surprised her with its intensity. The personal connection she felt to Admiral Reeves and his team wasn't based on friendship or extended interaction. It was based on a moment of trust, a recognition of shared humanity, and an understanding of the dedication required to serve something greater than oneself. The 3 minutes she had spent holding his rifle had connected her to their mission in ways she was still discovering. Communication traffic continued throughout the early morning hours, but with a different quality that suggested the most critical phase of the operation was complete. The tension in the communication center seemed to ease slightly, though everyone remained focused and alert. Maria began to hope that positive news might be forthcoming, though she knew better than to assume anything about military operations until they were officially concluded. The base began to prepare for the team's return, with medical facilities on standby, debriefing rooms prepared, and support personnel positioned for immediate assistance. Whatever had happened during the rescue operation, the SEALs would need comprehensive support to transition from operational mode back to base routine. Maria made sure every facility they might need was absolutely ready for their return.